Good afternoon on a very, very, very cold Johannesburg afternoon. And I know I'm always saying there's a war between Cape Town. I would love to be in Cape Town right now, provided that they're not snowy like us. But good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Coffee Chat, brought to you by SAPIN, which is the SA Property Investors Network. My name is Kali Maswani, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour. So, as always, we will start it with a little bit of fun, and that's for me to know where you guys are watching us from. And you can literally watch it live from Facebook or YouTube, so you can be anywhere in the world. So, I want to know you guys from Joburg. It's freezing, it's literally snowing in central Johannesburg, which is odd, but nonetheless. So, you can be from Joburg, Pretoria, maybe Bloemfontein or Cape Town or Kenya or Belgium. Just let me know where you are viewing us from, and I will be sure to shout you out in the chat box. Also, if this is your first time seeing us, please let me know. Even if you're shy, you can raise a hand, just cute little emoji in the chat box. Just let me know if this is your first time watching us. If this is your first time, rather, I would like to say thank you so much and welcome. So, who is SAPIN? Well, that's pretty simple. We are a network of like-minded investors who want to assist others in terms of education and information and networking to grow and or start their property portfolio. So if you heard from us from a friend, or you just saw, one of our social media posts and decided, let me watch, thank you very much and welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, we do know that currently the climate is a bit tough. Everybody is weary. Everybody is a bit concerned. So today we're going to be having a very interesting topic, which is how to get financially ready to purchase your first property. That's usually the one that has the biggest hurdles. People understand in general what you should or shouldn't do, but we're going to be more in depth with a gentleman by the name of Miguel Martins, who is a former financial executive, and now he is a full-time property investor with a very, very vast portfolio. And he is going to unpack with us what should you do, from the simple nuances like your credit score and how do you assist in that and help that, but also to banking, in terms of what do banks look for at home loan applications, for bond origination, which banks should you use? Should you use your primary bank? All those questions are going to be answered a little later with our guest, Miguel Martins. But also, I have a special treat for you, and that is going to be Bevan from SAPIN-Prepaid. So let's say you've bought your first property. Now you're going to manage it, you get your tenants in. The number one thing in our country right now that is on the rise is load shedding and electricity and the shortage of that. And also we want to teach you how to manage it. So Bevan, who is the area manager for Durban, is actually going to be logging in just a couple of minutes later, just to discuss also the topic of how to be financially ready. And he's going to be a regular guest, but also to discuss SAPIN-Prepaid and how that is something that is going to help you tremendously as investors when you're entering the property space, and how to manage your electricity, and also how to be more efficient and more cost effective. But that's a little bit later. And as I said, I'm still waiting for you guys to let me know where you are viewing me from. And if this is your first time, welcome. But without further ado, quite soon I'm going to be introducing Miguel. However, the events that are happening this week, there is a very, very amazing webinar, and it's free, that is happening tomorrow. And then that we're going to be discussing with the CEO, Andrew Walker, and Daniel Kazadi will also be a guest there. What strategy is best for you? And that, in layman terms, is something simple. We're literally talking about practical property, advice, and what strategy is best for you. If you're coastal, maybe Airbnbs are better for you. If you're close to a university, standard would be student accommodation. If you are in an area that has a lot of scenery, you could even do multi-let, buy-to-let. So what strategy is best for you? As we said, if the deal is good, strategies work throughout, but we do know from past history that certain strategies work even better in certain locations. So we're going to be having a free webinar to actually discuss what strategy best suits you, so that you can actually have a thriving property portfolio, because you're not trying to be making, student accommodation in an area that's like really far away from university. It's a bit impractical. That's going to be happening, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow, and that's going to be at 6:30. And please just The link is going to be in the chat box. If you go to our events, that webinar is completely free. Next, we are going to be having our monthly coaching and legal support webinar. That's going to be happening on Thursday. That's the 13th of July at 6 o'clock. And for those who are intermediate and professional members, you know how important these coaching webinars are, because this is where you actually get to ask your questions. You find out, how people are doing in terms of deals and all of those. That actually assists you in being able to move further and better for your coaching. So we have Calvin who's saying hi from Durban. Calvin, right now I'm a bit jealous because, like I said, it is snowing. I'm going to be talking about this the entire episode because I am shocked at the fact that we are snowing. However, just let me know where you guys are viewing me from, and also if this is your first time watching the show. I would absolutely love to hear from it. And as I said, we have the big event, the one that is hashtag Ask ABSA. And that's going to be on the 26th of July. This one, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be huge. We have industry experts from ABSA who are going to be answering your questions in terms of rising interest rates, in terms of the current economic climate, in terms of home loans. What exactly are they looking for in this current climate? And the hashtag for that is Ask ABSA. So we will have our link in the chat box for you guys to book your tickets. This one is going to be huge. We are having heads of departments that are going to be our guest speakers for that event. And it's an in-person event. That's the beauty of it. It's not even virtual, but we are working on making it accessible to everyone. That's going to be on the 26th of July. Please put that in your diaries. And then subsequently, we are also going to be having our Cape Town event. We're going to be having a walkthrough. That's on the 22nd of July. So if you are in Cape Town, please book your tickets. Walkthroughs give you an in-hand, in-depth understanding of property in terms of refurbishing, in terms of like if you're doing a flip, how do you do it? What are the things that you normally look out for? So we're going to be doing a property walkthrough in Cape Town. However, as I said earlier on, my guest is an amazing man, and he is an industry elite in terms of property investment and financial advice. So yes, alrighty then. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you will allow me to just give a huge warm welcome, and please put it in the chat box. Put like little clappy hands in the chat box for Miguel Martins. How are you, sir?
How's it, Kali? You look. I'm not sure if you look cold or if you look warm with that top on, with that jacket on.
I have my entire wardrobe right now because we're doing single-digit winter numbers. So I have my entire. So I am warm, but in the depths of my soul, it's actually quite cold. So how you are clearly living your best life in the warmth with just a lovely shirt on.
Yeah, no, I've got this nice flannel shirt on. It feels a lot warmer than just wearing the normal. So yeah, trying to stay warm. But as soon as you walk out into the fridge, you can realize how cold it is outside.
Then you remember, like, it's actually really cold today. Yeah, okay, so Miguel, as I said to them, we're going to be discussing how to get financially ready for your first property purchase. We always want to, we understand that you're supposed to get a bond and things, but the things that you need to be ready for and the things that the banks take into account in terms of approving a bond, and we're going to be talking about that later. But I also want to encourage everybody in the chat box to actually put all of your questions as I'm asking Miguel, and then once we've started, we'll get those going. And we also have people from Bloemfontein, which is awesome. So Miguel, I think for the average person, they kind of have an understanding of a credit score. But I would like for you to just kind of give us a more in-depth understanding of like, what is a credit score and why is it important?
No, fantastic. So we have a couple of different credit bureaus in the country. We've got Experian, we've got TransUnion, we have a TPN for tenants, and then one or two others. And each one of those, what a credit bureau does is it effectively collects people's payment behavior on how they pay their Edgar's account, how they pay their Vodacom account, how they pay their bank accounts. And all those different businesses provide these credit bureaus payment behavior, so that credit bureaus may put together a payment profile or a credit bureau score for each one of us. And why do they do that? And why do these companies share that payment behavior? So they don't share the customer's details necessarily, but they know that Miguel, who has ID number XY 1234, paid his bills on time, and that information is provided to the credit bureau, so the credit bureau can provide that information back to those companies. And in here, we're looking back to the banks, so that the banks can see when Miguel comes to them to finance a personal loan, a vehicle, or a home loan, how is Miguel paying off his Vodacom account, his Edgar's account, and all his other bank accounts, so that they can see, okay, if he's paying them off, then we're willing to take a risk and pay, and let Miguel take on a loan based on that. Of course, so one thing most people don't realize is that you get more than one score. So TransUnion work in a certain way, Experian work in a different way, and Credit and TPN build their score up in a different way. And then, of course, banks don't just take the credit bureau score. They actually build their own internal scores, because banks also have that payment behavior on your credit card, on your personal loan, or on your vehicle finance. So there are a bunch of scores floating around. They all have their, good, average, not so good, terrible versions of a score. And the banks tend to build their own scores for you. So the credit bureau score is very important. And it's very important to keep track of what your own credit bureau score is.
All righty then. So, guys, pay your cell phone contracts. I know that's a thing that people forget, and it will come back to haunt you when you're trying to buy your first property. But as we're continuing on that topic, we do know that there's certain costs that come with purchasing your first property. So, how much would you say of your salary or whatever income you have, if you are a business person or an entrepreneur, how much of your salary or income should go towards saving up for a deposit?
So let me rather turn the question around, if I could. First of all, you got to understand what deposit you're looking for. Whether you're saving for 10,000 or whether you're saving for 100,000, right? So and then put a plan towards that. So generally, and right now, with the current market and interest rates being where they are, banks are tending to pull up the handbrake a bit and requiring those who are taking a new home loan to put down a bigger deposit. So 100% home loans used to be quite very, very much available, and they still are, but there used to be a lot more available maybe up to a year ago, 6 months ago. Now banks are asking to please put down 5, 10, 15% deposits. So if you're looking for a R1 million bond or home loan, if you're looking to buy a R1 million property, okay, the bank's probably going to offer you a 900,000 rand loan. So you're needing a deposit of 100,000 rand. And then on top of that, there are also transfer fees. And the transfer fees just up to R1 million, you don't pay transfer duties, but you still pay legal fees. And as a rule of thumb, that's about 8% of the total. So on R1 million, be willing to wait for total transfer fees of about 80,000. So what you need to save is that 100,000 rand deposit plus roughly 8% of transfer fees, and we'll talk some more about transfer fees just now. So you've got a total saving that you need to get to, that you need to put together of about 180,000 rand. And then it's up to you to say, okay, I want to do this in the next 12 months, the next 24 months, 2 years, and let's call it 20 months. And you got to save 9,000 rand a month, which is quite a bit, right? But now, everyone hopefully gets a bit of a deposit, a bit of a bonus, etc. So it's up to you to put a plan together as to how you get to that savings that will allow you to buy your first property or your first investment property.
Okay, and you did touch on to legal costs, because I think that's also something people aren't particularly aware of. To go, well, for the most part, maybe you understood, okay, I have to save up for a deposit, but there are other costs in purchasing a property that you maybe would not have taken account, like your transfer costs and your legal costs. So when it comes to that, is there also, how much should you save on average for those costs that you didn't understand actually encompass the entire process of purchasing a property.
Absolutely, and when people get stuck, right, and people don't even know it right up until the actual registration process, where where all of a sudden they're given a bill from the attorney and say, okay, you owe us, 50,000 rand, and all of a sudden they're scrambling to find the cash, to borrow the cash from family, friends, and then all of a sudden taking out personal loans at the last minute to cover those expenses, right? But it becomes a mad rush, and then they'll really take what they can get, and the interest rates that come with that. So definitely have to be prepared for it. There are three cash components that one needs when buying a property effectively. One is your deposit. You spoke about that, right? We all know plan on a 10% deposit of the bank. That 10% deposit will not only, the bank will make it a requirement, but also the bank will also give you the best price, usually, if you're willing to put down a 10% deposit. Second one is transfer costs. Now, my suggestion, advice is that when you're looking at a property, ask the agent, because there's a schedule that actually determines what these costs are. Ask the agent for the property you're looking at, whether it's a 750,000, a million, or a 2 million rand property. The agent will tell you exactly, well, to some degree, what those costs are. The attorney fees might differ from attorney to attorney, but they should be pretty much in line. But you should get a very good idea of what those transfer fees are. The transfer duties, which is what you pay to the deeds office and to SARS effectively, those are fixed. The attorney's fees might differ to some degree, but the estate agent can tell you what those fees are. The third component, if you've bought smartly, you've probably bought a property that needs a bit of a paint, but where the price more than validates that cost. Understand, as you go into a property, you're going to need to do some renovations, whether it's just a paint, whether you're tiling, or whether you're doing other more extensive things. But again, understand what that is. That doesn't stop you from buying the property, but it might stop you from moving into the property if you're not happy with the smelly carpets. But the smelly carpets have saved you 100,000 rand off the price, but they are going to cost you 20,000 rand to replace. So first is deposit for the bank. Second, cash for the attorney. You can't finance those. You need it as cash. It's actually, the banks won't accept that you finance those. And the third one is cash for any renovations that you require after you've purchased.
Okay, and then now as we're talking about banks, this one is one that I've actually realized was very common. You could even argue universally, it seems to be understood that you should or can only get your bond from your primary bank. And I want to know, are you obliged to only take your bond out from your primary bank?
No, absolutely not. You're more than welcome to and encouraged to try various different banks. Even if so, usually if you bank with a particular bank, that bank should give you the best offer on the market. Okay, but depending where that home loan business is within that bank, might be more risk averse or they might be less risk averse. So although you bank with that bank, or your check account, your credit card, your transactional, you might even have a vehicle finance with that bank, the home loan that they can offer, that they come back to you, might not be with the same good terms that another bank would go with. So my suggestion there would be that you absolutely apply with your bank, but you also apply with the other banks, and ensure and give yourself that comfort of knowledge that you are getting the best deal from your bank than you would have otherwise from the other banks.
And then I think this one is actually super important, because this is, again, people don't know this until they're actually in the process. But it would be amazing if you have a rough understanding of, what is it that banks look out for when considering a home loan application? We've talked about credit score, but is there other things?
Sure. Yeah, there effectively are three broad things. So one is your affordability. First and foremost, the bank, as soon as you put the application in, the first thing they check is, can you afford it? And the way they calculate that, in the past, they would have taken 30% of your gross income, and they would have applied that to get an idea. These days, with the National Credit Act, we are required, or the banks are required, to actually look at what do you earn, what are your monthly expenses, and what is left over. And of course, out of that, they deduct they take out any rent that you currently pay, which you're now going to replace, with a home loan payment. But they look at what's left over. They refer to that as your disposable income. And from that, they determine what you can afford. So if you have a disposable income of 10,000 Rand, that equates to roughly R1 million, actually a little bit less these days with current interest rates. But therefore, you can afford that. The second thing they look at is your credit score. We spoke about credit scores just now, right? And so it's worth looking out for. So every credit bureau provides you a free credit report once a year. And there are other ways to look at to keep tabs on your credit score throughout the year for free. But look at your credit score, maintain that, keep that in good standing. A Vodacom account that is a couple $100 past due shows up on your credit score. Banks will take it into consideration. We're borrowing R1 million from a bank, but you're overdue with a couple $100. That does impact your pricing, and they will require a deposit because it's starting to show a particular behavior, but they might not decline immediately on that. But look after your credit score. And then lastly, the last thing that banks look at, once they've seen that you can afford it, that you're good for it, your credit, your payment behavior is good. The last thing they look at is the property you're purchasing. Will it provide value as surety for the loan they're going to give you? So the bank looks at the property. You're buying a property you're wanting a loan of R1 million. Has the property got value of R1 million? And they place a surety on that. So if anything does go wrong, they can always come and take that property and sell that to reclaim what they've paid you. So 3 things: affordability, your income; your credit score, how good are you at honoring your debts; and lastly, the value of the property to secure their loan.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting with that last point because it literally piggybacks so effortlessly with our actual first question from our viewers. And you said obviously they want to make sure that the loan at which they're borrowing has the value of the loan amount that you're asking for. So this Facebook user wants to know, how best can one finance a property that is vandalized in a good area and banks refuse to fund it, saying it cannot be occupied?
So, sure. Well, you obviously can't do it with banks then. If the banks are telling you that, then immediately you can't. I think that's where you got to use some creative finance or creative methods. You're either going to find those funds elsewhere. You could possibly, now we're kind of getting quite creative here. You could possibly work with a seller to make it occupiable. Obviously, if banks are not going to, if it's vandalized such that the roof has been torn apart and it rains and it's cold and all the rest, banks can't finance that because they can't sell it if they need to. You can possibly approach a bank with a plan from a builder and a quote as to how it's going to be fixed, and demonstrating the funds on how you're going to fix it to a point where it can be occupiable. So there's a proper plan, there's funds in place, there's a quote from a builder, etc. Even then, banks might only give you 60 or 70%, to be honest. So that definitely is a unique environment, but I think that sounds like a nice opportunity for an investor to leverage a good deal and make some money on the back end.
Okay, so now we have a few questions from a few others. The first one is from Samkelo, and they would like to know, what are the key financial goals I should establish before investing in property? We did mention get your credit right, show a behavioral pattern that you pay off any loans. But is there any other, financial goals that one should establish?
Sure. So, Samkelo, I think so. It's an interesting and a broad question. I think if one, as an investor, puts your hat on, there are a multitude of types of investments that one could invest in, right? You can invest in shares, you can invest in unit trusts, which is a version of shares, Krugerrands, all sorts of things. Property is an investment, is a particular investment asset, type asset, and you know, and you know, if that's something you're interested in, if you want to get into properties, there's actually shares. You can buy a REIT, and that gets you into property. Property investment, in terms of what we talk about, is actually whether you own the property, you manage the property, you let out the property, etc. And I think that isn't for everyone, but it's people like me. I enjoy the fact that I see a property, I bring it to life, I fix it, I get people in there, and I enjoy the business of property investment through property management. But I think you need to build up some funds, as you've spoken about, and I think you probably, if you want to invest in shares, you've got there's a bit of a learning curve that you've got to go through in terms of understanding about share investment, as with property investment. But if you're wanting to just pull money together, pull cash together to ultimately allow you to get into property investment, then I think banks offer various savings accounts, fixed deposits. They also offer relatively low risk money market accounts, you know, and the returns on there are known. So as opposed to investments in shares where it can go up and down and you never know what you work out with, or how you may end up with. So if you've got a plan, you've got a 12-month, 18-month, 20-month plan of putting funds together, then I might definitely look at a money market account, fixed deposit, etc. But there definitely are a couple of options out there to save cash towards your cash portion of your property investment.
Mm-hmm. And so this is quite an interesting one from Jerry. So they want to know, like, on the requirements of the bank, if you're no longer owing Edgar's or a Vodacom, as you mentioned, and you were paying the right way, what is the bank going to use to measure your credit score or your standing? So I think if we're going to break it down into simpler terms, what happens when you technically don't have any more debts that you're paying off? So do you then forfeit a credit score, or do you still count as a credit? Like, how does that work?
Sure, if I understand it correctly, so the banks rely on the credit bureau to provide them credible data. The credit bureau reports what they're provided to from the different data inputs. You know, so if you've been paying your Edgar's account, your Vodacom account, but for whatever reason, you might have been in arrears, but you've caught up with that. That needs to be communicated from, we're using Edgar's as an example, to the credit bureaus. So you can go to the credit bureaus and ask and provide them proof that you've paid up your accounts, etc. And the credit bureaus will update their records. But ultimately, that comes through from the likes of credit providers, your Edgar's, Vodacom, MTN.
I think what they're trying to ask is, if you were paying correctly, let's say you're fine, and then you close the account, so there is no longer like a tracking for you because you've paid off everything. So then, what would the banks use?
Okay, so then there isn't really a credit profile as such. So the banks will, the credit doesn't have to be current. They will look at your history, because ultimately they are tracking your behavior over time. So as long as it's in the last year or two, they should still be able to pull that. We often have this problem with new workers, people who've just joined the working market, the jobs market. They're out of varsity or out of school, and they haven't taken up vehicle finance or personal, and even a credit card. And banks tend to refer to it as thin files. They can't find them on a system because that person hasn't taken up credit, right? They avoided credit, which is often a good behavior to have. The banks then look at them, and they have ways to look at that kind of person and ensure that, and still validate whether they have a good payment behavior or not. Then in that case, it's actually good. It actually sounds better to go to your own bank, because they do see your check account, even your check account without an overdraft, or your savings account, and how you've behaved with that, you know, and how you're able to save, and where do you spend your money every month. So it's definitely important to get a good home loans consultant to work with you to be able to put together your home loan application in situations such as this.
Okay, so there is obviously a track record that they'll potentially, but if you're brand spanking new, you've only been working for the last 12 months, and naturally you were avoiding credit, then, as Miguel said, it's probably best to then try and get a bond through your current bank, because at the very least, they know, your transaction patterns if you don't have an ongoing or a previous credit record. Okay.
Definitely doesn't mean you can't. You should still go to all the banks. Always go to all the banks. But but your own bank should give you your best offer. You always and you always want to make sure that your own bank knows that you've gone to all the other banks, because you want to make sure that they're on their toes to make sure that they give you the best offer, right?
Yes. Okay. And so Samungelo also wants to know, this is another one that has always been on my mind. How should I assess my current financial situation to determine my investment capacity? So, it happens all the time. Somebody makes, 8,000 rand a month, and all of a sudden they have like a super expensive car that they want to buy. And now they're in trouble 6 months later and it's getting repossessed. So he wants to know, okay, how do you determine this is kind of my playing field? This is where I would probably buy my first property. I might want a 3 million rand, but I should probably stick to the 1 million and below mark.
Yeah, I think so. I think that question, you need to understand what investment strategy you have. Whether you're going to be buying, you're going to be targeting the 600,000 to 700,000 mark. You want to buy a couple of those type properties, whether you're building up to $1 million, 2 million purchase, and what comes with that. So important to understand where you're heading towards, and then look at what you can afford. And of course, you can't aim for 2 million, but you can't afford 700,000. But understand what your strategy is. Look at what your affordability is. Once you understand those two elements, then you can start starting to put your investment strategy together. There are various tools out there that you can look at your affordability, that can give you a pre-qualified home loan or amount, at least in terms of what one can afford. And so lots of tools to understand how to put that picture together. But it is putting a couple of puzzles together. We could go into in terms of where you're going to go, sectional title, full title, etc. Finance and affordability is one component, and it's an extremely important component because that's what enables you to move forward. But definitely understanding what your affordability is in terms of what your spare income, what your disposable income is critical.
Okay, and as we're getting ready to wrap up, if you have any more questions for Miguel, please put them in the chat box. And as I said, we are going to be introducing our special guest, Bevan, in a few moments. But Daniel wants to know something. That's actually quite an interesting question. It says, if there is a great deal, but the banks refuse to finance it at 100% of the purchase price because they have hit the exposure limit in that area, any ways of motivating a 100% loan?
So, and this is, and often we don't get the right communications. So, banks don't have exposure levels based on LTV, based on price. So, what banks might have is that a bank will generally not fund or not finance more than 30-35% in a particular area, because they don't want to be overexposed, and this might be in a suburb, might be in a development, but banks, and so they'll probably go to 30-35%, and then really other banks need to come in and finance the other portion. Okay, even if you're doing 100%, even if you do 80%, banks will still not finance. I think the challenge there might be something slightly different. But really, if banks are struggling with 100%, I think that's where deposits important. And if you're buying a good investment deal, often it's if you do put a deposit in now, you might be able to refinance it depending on your deal and pull out your deposit out of equity, down the line. So there's a two-step approach to this. Unfortunately, it does need that cash up front. But this is where we've been speaking a lot about financing with your own bank versus applying it at various banks. This is where, if you do apply at various banks, you should never have an exposure limit issue, because if one bank has too much exposure in that area, and it's a percentage, and you'll never know this up front, and the bank will never tell you this either. They'll just say, so, we won't finance further. But if you apply to multiple banks, you will always have the other banks who haven't reached the exposure levels financing in that space. And that's why it's always good to, not just hedge your bets, but diversify your financing, ultimately have multiple options and opportunities for financing available to you.
I think what you just mentioned now is actually quite interesting, and not something the average person would have thought, that if you have a generous deposit up front, you could potentially recoup it via refinancing, at a later stage, so that you could then take that money and, put it into another deal. Because I think a lot of the time, people, especially first-time investors, is that they think, well, I need to put out the deposit, and then it's only after 10 years that I can do capital gains and such, and then I'll just worry about the rental. Whereas you're like, no, in about 5 or 6 years, you can literally recoup it again and go, okay, that's great, I'll refinance it. So maybe if people start looking at it like that, to go, well, you can technically get back your deposit.
And it's not 5 or 6 years; it's 5 or 6 months. If you bought correctly, and you bought undervalued, right? Because it's a distressed seller. You'll be able to, realize value in the property because you painted it, you fixed the garden, and all sorts of other things. There's nothing stopping you from going back to the bank 6 months later and saying, hi, I've now found an additional 300,000 Rand in the property that wasn't there because I bought it at a discount. I'd like to refinance because now the property is at the right market value, because before it was below market value. And you can go back to the bank within 6 months. And actually, when you get your original financing, get the bond to include what you expect to come back with later. So part of property investment is finding the right property. There's always property-related strategies that you got to consider. But then, if you understand how to leverage it from a finance perspective, you're able to look at it from a whole different perspective. And ultimately, that's the investor's finance cycle, is they buy now, they put the cash down, they refinance, get the cash out to allow them to buy the next property.
All righty then. Well, I want to say thank you so much, Miguel, especially for these amazing nuggets that you kind of just inputted in terms of refinancing, and also looking at having different pots, because these are cash for like your deposits and your transfer costs and your legal fees, that you cannot take those via financing. They have to actually be cash. So you need to take all these things into consideration in order for you to be ready for your first property. And if you give it, let's say 12 months, like you said, to go, okay, I'm gonna start saving up this much, and I will be in a better standing for when I approach the banks for a bond, to go, well, I already have this and this and this, so I don't look like all of the risk is gonna go to the bank.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't stop here. I think on SAPIN's Facebook page, SAPIN Hub, at least on Facebook, and on the other platforms, by all means, go ahead and drop in questions there. Tag me, and happy to come in and answer them on Facebook and have a conversation there. I think these questions, these questions are common, and people often have these challenges. So putting them on there, you're going to get a whole lot of comments and conversation coming in. I'll come in if I'm tagged and on that post, and provide a view in terms of how the banks see it as well. So definitely leverage that Facebook page.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Miguel Martins, ladies and gentlemen, a former financial executive and seasoned property investor. And as I said, we have another seasoned property investor, and that is a gentleman by the name of Bevan. Hello, Bevan.
Good afternoon, Kelly, and good afternoon to all your viewers.
Oh, fantastic. And as I was mentioning about it earlier on, is that you are both the gentleman that's going to just give us some tips again of how to, what do you need to do to get financially ready for your first property purchase. But once you've purchased that property, then how do you manage it? And the most prevalent thing right now in property and just in our country is electricity. And SAPIN-Prepaid is going to help our investors, manage the electricity and be more cost effective about that. But before we get into SAPIN-Prepaid, I'd like to know from you, a seasoned investor, what are the top 3, tips you would give somebody who's trying to get financially ready for their first property purchase?
Awesome. So I think it's quite exciting because I'm going to jump onto these coffee chats more frequently to give a couple of tips to help people as they go on their journey with their property. My focus is going to be on this idea of facilities management and then also the utilities management. So I'll focus on that, drop in a couple of tips more frequently as we go on with these. Specifically today, when we're talking about getting ready for purchasing your property, again, I'm looking at it from a facilities management perspective, because when we buy a property, we don't sort of make this one-off purchase, consume it, and then move on and purchase something again. It's this purchase that, if you're anything like me, the idea is you're purchasing it for generational wealth. So you want your kids' kids to benefit from what you put in now. So facilities management, we often hear it in sort of the corporate space, big malls, shopping centers, etc. They talk about facilities management. You should have the same mindset for your own portfolio. So from your first property, start thinking along that line. How am I creating the right systems? And that's a big thing for me, is the systems need to, look after your administration and make sure that your job is easier, because, and maybe that's the wrong word, because when we're in property investing, we want it to be as passive as possible. We don't want it to be a job. We want it to be a passive income. So we need to systemize as much as possible to free up our time, so as it's not a time-consuming investment as such. So my main things that I really suggest to people is think about that facilities management holistically. Think about every level of your property. From that first stage of purchasing the property, a lot of us go into our buying cost mindset, and we're good at budgeting for that. And then what happens after that? And I think it's very important for us to remember that there are 2 major sides to it, is managing your facilities, managing your building or your properties as a business. So my biggest one that I always refer people to is systemize that with financial software. There's some great financial software out there, some that are reasonably priced and some that are even free. So that's a big one for me, is get people onto that. When we think about systemizing things like utilities, the worst thing you can do for yourself is go through the process of every month going to the property, reading your electricity meter, reading your water meter, or even sending your estate agent to go and do that. Because what happens is there's too much human error there. Someone's going to make a mistake, make the wrong reading. And so for me, a big one, and that's one of the big reasons we focus on SAPIN-Prepaid as a tool within the community, is to say, hey, free up that time, free up that room for mistakes and lack of recovery of the expense for utilities, and use prepaid meters. So that's my third one. My second one. Going into my third one, as you asked, which would be, as you're purchasing a property, a lot of us are focused, as Miguel was saying earlier, on budgeting towards our deposit, budgeting towards your buying costs of being your attorneys, and the transfer fees, the bond registration fees. Another very important budget item that I think people need to really start thinking about and putting in place is the long-term journey on your properties. So, and again, I'll use that word facilities management, because that kind of highlights everything, but specifically on your maintenance plan. So the biggest one for me around maintenance planning is don't be afraid of getting a property inspector to come in, and there's great property inspectors in the community. So I think there's good resource for that. And what a good property inspector will do is they'll give you a maintenance plan. They'll come in, they'll say, listen, these are key things that need to be fixed immediately. So whether it's a high risk on a roof leaking, etc., And then they'll also say, this is what you should do over the next 7, 10 years. And for me, that's a very good tool to have. So if you can get a maintenance plan in place as part of your buying process, because it gives you the budget for your conversion costs when you're going to renovate to, as Miguel was saying, get access to that equity in the property, because you bought it below market value. You want to get the equity to grow to what the market value is, and you're going to have that renovation that you'll do. But the more important element of that is, what are you going to do to manage that property for eternity? So for your kids to benefit from the foundation that you put in place now. So for me, that's pretty much what I'm going to touch on today. And I think there's so much to go on when we start unpacking these elements. Thanks, Kali.
No, but thank you so much for that, Bevan. I think what you said is, the beauty is you are going to be a regular guest for us. So we can even prompt people to have their questions ready for when, Bevan shows up with his facilities manager's hat and gives us all the tips and tricks in terms of the maintenance of the property once you have it. Because a lot of the time, people look at the short term, like you said. How can I buy it? Once I've gotten the bond, okay, we're good. And then 6 months later, they're hit with a huge bill for something they had not taken into account, right? Which could have been mitigated. Like you're saying, if there's a leak and there's a giant burst, if you have the contingencies in place, you are able to pick that up a lot quicker than getting a huge water bill 6 months later. So I think that's actually very important. And thank you very much for your tidbit from SAPIN-Prepaid, like you said, from facilities in terms of electricity and also water management, which are the two very, very key components about property investing.
100%. And it's great to be here, and I look forward to the future events.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. That was Bevan from SAPIN-Prepaid. So as I close up, I'm going to be discussing our events yet again. And the one that I'm really excited about is the one that's a free webinar that is happening tomorrow, where we are going to be discussing with our CEO, Andrew Walker, what strategy is best for you. So if you want to invest in property and pertaining to location, you're at a specific place, or you want to garner a certain portfolio, what strategy is best for you? As we know, with property, if the deal is great, the strategy will come into fruition. However, we do know that certain strategies work best in certain areas. And so we are going to be discussing that with the CEO, Andrew Walker, and that's happening tomorrow on the 11th of July, and that's 6:30. Then after that, it is the coaching and legal support webinar that is happening on Thursday. That's the 13th of July at 6 o'clock. If you're intermediate or professional, you know how useful these coaching sessions are, because you get to ask your questions, things that you can't just ask on a regular basis. You're like, oh, actually, I've always wanted to know this. You can put those questions, because we do have industry experts for each and every single one that we host. After that, we have the big event called #AskAbsa. That's going to be happening on the 26th of July. And that is where we're going to be having key members of the ABSA team, from economists right through to home loans division, where we're going to be discussing things that pertaining to our economic climate right now in South Africa. So you get to ask industry elites in the banking sector, which is ABSA, about questions that has always been pressing for you. So you need to mark your diaries for that one. That's happening on the 26th of July at the Bryanston Country Club. And lastly, we are going to be having a property walkthrough that's happening in Cape Town on the 22nd of July. I know these are very, very much fun, because you actually get a hands-on experience, because we can talk all we want, which is fun. However, once you walk into a property and you see and you understand, how much refurbishing costs can rank up, what do you traditionally refurbish in a property? So walkthroughs are very, very great if you want a hands-on experience and an understanding of how to invest in property. So that's going to be happening in Cape Town on the 26th of July. So, and also we have our mastermind, which happens every month. That's going to be on the 27th of July. But hopefully I'm going to be seeing you tomorrow. Remember, it's a free webinar with our CEO, Andrew Walker, for the strategy, in terms of what strategy is best for you. However, as always, it has been an absolute pleasure And thank you so much for joining us for this lovely hour. And I hope you are walking away understanding what you need to do to get financially ready. And as always, I'll ask you, what are your goals for the next 5 months for the year in terms of your property? So you can either join us in terms of being one of our members, or whatever questions that you have to ask, you can definitely ask us on support@SA Property Investors Network. From me to you, I will see you next week.